The night air clung to me like a damp shroud, the April breeze carrying the faint smell of lilacs from the neighbor's yard. I should have been home feet up watching the late ball game like any other man my age. But instead, I found myself pressed against the cool brick of my son-in-law's house, breath-shallow heart pounding. Through the half-open window came voices that twisted my stomach into knots. First Elaine's laugh, my wife of 27 years. Then Daniel's steady and low a sound I had once trusted. When the old fool signs, he said we'll have everything we planned for. I nearly dropped right there in the shrubs. Old fool, that was me. I hadn't planned to be there at all. The truth is, I was just passing through Maple Street on my way back from the hardware store. One of those idle whims older men allow themselves. I thought I might stop by Daniel's place, maybe see if he needed a hand with the gutters he'd been complaining about. A surprise visit, nothing more. My daughter Rebecca had married him 3 years ago. She wasn't home tonight. I knew that she'd told me she was staying late at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. So why, I asked myself as I slowed the truck, was Elaine's emerald green Buick Enclave, sitting bold as brass in Daniel's driveway. She had told me she'd be shopping with a friend in Davenport until late evening. I knew that car better than my own reflection. I'd bought it for her birthday 2 summers back. There it was, gleaming in the porch light like a warning beacon. At first I laughed it off. Maybe she had car trouble. Maybe Daniel had offered to help. But as I pulled over to the curb and killed the engine, a heaviness settled in my chest. Something was wrong. Instinct told me so. I got out, boots crunching softly against the gravel shoulder, and moved quietly along the hedge. The Parker place wasn't large, an old 2-story brick, the kind with windows that never quite sealed against the Midwest wind. That's how I caught the voices so clearly. Elaine's tone was playful, almost girlish, the way she hadn't sounded with me in years, and Daniel's steady calculating too calm. My ears strained as I crouched below the sill. "Once Harold signs, the rest is easy," he said. "Harold, my name." The words slammed into me. My hands trembled against the brick. I shifted, careful not to snap a twig beneath my boot. Elaine answered her laugh, soft, cruel. "You're sure the statutes will hold?" "Positive. Iowa law entitles you to half the marital estate. With your testimony, the court will believe he's been hiding assets. Trust me." For a moment I couldn't breathe. Hiding assets, court. My own wife plotting with my daughter's husband. The air grew colder. The lilac scent turned sour. I staggered back to my truck, each step heavy. Inside the cab felt like a coffin. My palms sweated against the steering wheel. I fumbled for my phone and pressed record, holding it toward the window. It caught only fragments: Elaine's laughter, Daniel's clipped voice, the mention of half of everything. I sat there, engine off, watching my wife's silhouette cross the curtain. My Elaine, with whom I'd built a life brick by brick. We'd raised Rebecca together, survived lean years, celebrated victories. And now she was inside that house, conspiring to carve up the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. I remembered the Buick again, the way Elaine had beamed when I handed her the keys. "You've worked too hard, Harold," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "You deserve a wife who drives something worthy." Was that performance too? The recording caught another snippet. Daniel again. "By September he'll be divorced and you'll be wealthy and free. He won't see it coming." My gut twisted. I had seen plenty in my 62 years: economic downturns, the collapse of small companies, betrayals among partners, but nothing prepared me for betrayal in my own home. I thought about Rebecca. Sweet, hard-working, still so young. Did she know, or was she as blind as I'd been? The thought that my daughter's husband and my wife had allied themselves against me, well, it felt like a knife turning slowly in my chest. I considered marching up to the door, kicking it open and demanding answers, but instinct stopped me. A man who shows his hand too early loses the game. I had spent decades negotiating contracts and building trust with clients. I knew strategy. This would be no different except the stakes were my life. So I sat there in the dark, recording every poisoned word I could capture. Sweat dripped down my temples though the night was cool. My pulse thudded in my ears louder than their voices. And then my phone caught Elaine's words as clear as a gunshot. Harold will never see this coming. I almost laughed. She was wrong. I had seen it now. I had heard enough to know. And if there's one thing I had learned as a builder, it's this: once you spot the crack in the foundation, you don't wait. You brace, you reinforce, you prepare for the collapse. The front door opened suddenly. My heart leapt. I ducked low behind the steering wheel. Elaine stepped out, first handbag dangling from her arm. Daniel close behind, adjusting his tie. They paused at the end of the driveway, Daniel's hand hovering too near her back. They didn't notice me, not yet. I forced my expression into stone, turned the ignition, and let the engine purr to life. The sound made them glance my way. Elaine froze, shock spreading across her face like spilled ink. "Harold," she called, her voice pitched high, unnatural. "What are you doing here?" I rolled down the window, gave a smile I didn't feel. "Just finished an inspection nearby. Thought I'd stop in to see Rebecca." My tone was even, but inside my chest burned with betrayal. Daniel stepped forward, eyes narrowing, lawyer sharp. "She's not here. We were just reviewing some documents." I nodded as though the explanation satisfied me. "Of course. Don't let me interrupt." But I had interrupted something. Something that would change the course of my life. I drove away, Elaine's pale face shrinking in the rearview mirror, Daniel's posture stiff and protective. And in my pocket, the phone kept recording. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the spare bedroom, the ceiling fan spinning slow, steady circles above me like the ticking of a clock. Elaine had slipped into bed beside me hours earlier, breathing evenly as though nothing at all had happened in that house on Maple Street. I could still hear her voice in my head. Harold will never see this coming. The cruelty of it gnawed at me, every word echoing like a hammer against steel. I'd never felt so many emotions at once: rage, sorrow, humiliation. Rage that Elaine, the woman who had stood by my side for nearly 3 decades, could conspire against me. Sorrow for the life I thought we had, the love I believed was real. Humiliation because I had been so blind. She murmured in her sleep, rolled onto her side, and reached for me out of habit. I turned away, stiff as a board. If she noticed, she didn't stir again. I stared into the dark and thought, tomorrow everything changes. By dawn, I gave up on sleep altogether and padded down to the kitchen. I brewed coffee strong enough to strip paint and sat at the table staring at my calloused hands wrapped around the mug. These hands had built houses, schools, offices, structures that still stood tall across our county. Yet I couldn't seem to hold my own life together. The betrayal forced me to take a long look at the years that led me here. I first met Elaine in 1996 at a church picnic. She was a widow, then raising Rebecca by herself after her first husband died in a car accident. She wore a yellow sundress and laughed easily at my clumsy jokes. I wasn't rich, but I was solid, reliable. We married within a year. I raised Rebecca as my own. She was only 7 when I walked her down the aisle of her elementary school graduation, beaming in her tiny white dress. Dad, she called me from the moment Elaine and I exchanged vows. Over the years, she grew into a bright, determined woman, the pride of our small family. When she brought Daniel Parker home from law school, I admit I was impressed. The young man had polish. He spoke with confidence, carried himself with dignity. My gut told me he was ambitious, but I brushed it aside. Rebecca loved him, and that was enough. We gave them a wedding in our backyard, strung with fairy lights, Elaine glowing beside me, as though she had built this perfect life. Looking back, maybe the cracks had been there. Elaine always liked nice things, designer handbags, spa treatments, expensive dinners. I chalked it up to her enjoying comforts I hadn't grown up with. I built Mitchell & Sons construction from nothing but grit and sweat. For years, money was tight. When it finally flowed, I let her spend. After all, hadn't she stuck with me through the lean years? But maybe that generosity blinded me. Maybe Daniel saw in Elaine a partner for something darker, a way to siphon off what I had earned. As the sun climbed, I made a decision. I would not confront Elaine, not yet. My father once told me never walk into a fight without knowing the weapons your enemy carries. That advice had served me well in business. It would serve me now. I needed evidence, not emotion. I opened the old oak cabinet in the den where I kept our files. Decades of tax returns, bank statements, contracts, all meticulously labeled. Elaine teased me for my pack rat ways, but I knew better. Order was protection. The first thing I noticed was missing checks withdrawals I didn't remember authorizing. Boutique shops in Chicago spa retreats, 2 counties over transfers labeled consulting fees. Consulting for who my company had no consultants beyond Martha Caldwell, the accountant I'd trusted for 20 years. I reached for my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found her number. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice warm, groggy. Harold, everything all right? Martha, I said, steadying my tone. I need you to run through my personal and business accounts quietly. Don't involve anyone else. Something's not right. A pause. How urgent? Urgent enough that I wouldn't ask if it weren't serious. I'll pull the records she promised. Give me until tonight. Relief mixed with dread. If Elaine and Daniel were plotting, I needed Martha's trained eye to confirm it. By late morning, Elaine breezed into the kitchen, hair done, perfume trailing. She kissed my cheek as though nothing were wrong. Morning, love. Coffee still hot. I forced a smile, hiding the turmoil beneath. Fresh pot on the stove. She poured herself a mug, humming under her breath. I studied her every gesture, suddenly foreign, the tilt of her head, the way she tapped the spoon against the rim. Was she always this good at pretending? Or was this a performance just for me? Busy day, she asked casually. Plenty to do, I said, more than you know. She never suspected that I had been parked outside Daniel's house only hours earlier, listening to her conspire. That ignorance was my advantage. That evening, Martha called back. Her voice was tight professional. Harold, I went through 6 months of statements. There are irregular transfers from your joint account, $48,000 total. Several withdrawals coincide with dates Daniel filed motions at the courthouse. He's been digging through your corporate filings, too. My stomach dropped. So it's not just in my head. No, she said softly. I think they're building a case. Elaine's name is on everything. Her words hit harder than any blow. Elaine hadn't just strayed. She had set herself up as the spear against me. Harold, Martha added, if this is as deliberate as it looks, you could lose half your assets in divorce court. Maybe more if they frame it right. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat in silence, the phone heavy in my hand. Upstairs, Elaine laughed at something on the television. It was the same laugh I had heard at Daniel's house, light and musical. Only now it was poison in my ears. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window, looking out at the darkened street. The world hadn't changed, but mine had. Tomorrow I thought I'd start fighting back. The next morning I rose before dawn again. My body moved on muscle memory, but my mind churned with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. For decades I'd built a reputation as a man of steady hands and honest work. Now I needed to become something else, quiet, observant, calculating. As I laced up my boots, I caught a glimpse of Elaine's purse on the dresser. Expensive leather gold clasp shining faintly in the low light. Inside it, no doubt, lay the phone she used to text Daniel when she thought I wasn't looking. I felt the temptation strong as a tidal pull. One glance at her messages and I might know everything. But no. Acting rash would only alert her. If Elaine and Daniel were bold enough to plot in my daughter's living room, then arrogance was their weakness. They thought I was blind. I would let them think so a little longer. At breakfast, Elaine was her usual polished self, hair curled, perfume, fresh smile, effortless. "You're quiet this morning," she said, buttering her toast. "Just thinking about payroll," I lied, sipping coffee. "Don't overwork yourself, Harold. You've carried this company for so long. Maybe it's time to let others handle more." The comment landed with a thud. Was it casual suggestion or subtle maneuvering? I couldn't tell anymore. I forced a nod. "You might be right." Her smile widened, as though my surrender was inevitable. Once at the office, I called in Mike Rodriguez. Mike wasn't a lawyer or accountant. He was a private investigator I'd known since he helped a buddy of mine during a custody battle. He was sharp, discreet, and had a knack for digging up truths people wanted buried. He arrived within the hour, wiry frame, hidden beneath a worn leather jacket, eyes darting like a hawk. "What's going on, Harold?" he asked, leaning on my desk. I lowered my voice. "I need you to follow Elaine. Discreetly. And Daniel Parker, too." Mike whistled low. "That's your son-in-law, right?" "Not for much longer, if I'm right." His expression hardened. "What are you expecting to find?" "Evidence," I said flatly. "Whatever they're planning, I want to know before they move." Mike nodded, no judgment in his eyes. Only focus. "I'll set up surveillance, cameras, recordings, phone dumps if we can manage it. You'll have answers." The rest of the day passed in a haze of construction meetings and site inspections, my body present, but my mind elsewhere. By evening, Mike sent me a text. "You were right to call me." We met in a diner off Route 6, the kind of place where no one asked questions if two men sat in a corner booth too long. He slid a small recorder across the table. "Picked this up outside Parker's office," he said. "Left a mic in a planter yesterday when I heard him step out to make a call. Listen." I pressed play. Daniel's voice came through smug, confident. "Margaret, everything's lining up. By September, we'll have him cornered. Financial disclosure, asset division, spousal support. You'll get half of everything plus the house." Margaret. Hearing Elaine's middle name, the one only used in formal papers, made my skin crawl. Daniel continued. "He's old-fashioned. Never suspected we've been collecting his records for months. By the time he figures it out, the court will already be on our side." Elaine's voice chimed in, faintly, laughter tinged with cruelty. "Harold really thinks I love him. The man has no idea." I nearly crushed the recorder in my fist. Mike's eyes were steady. "This isn't just suspicion anymore. They're building a case." I nodded, throat dry. "Then we build ours." That night, while Elaine slept peacefully beside me, I drafted a list. Not of dreams or projects, but of weapons documents, allies' strategies. Financial records, Martha's analysis already showed irregularities. Surveillance, Mike would continue to gather proof. Legal advice, I'd need counsel of my own, someone ruthless but honest. Rebecca, my daughter deserved the truth, though timing would be everything. The hardest part was keeping still, pretending normalcy. Elaine curled against me in the dark, her warmth once a comfort, now a reminder of betrayal. I thought of the vows we'd exchanged under the oak tree behind the church. How many of her words had been lies even then? 3 days later, Mike delivered photographs. Elaine at a country club luncheon with Daniel heads bent close, their body language intimate. Elaine handing him a folder outside a courthouse. Receipts for luxury purchases charged to our joint account, delivered to Daniel's office suite. "This is just the start," Mike said. "Give me another week and I'll have enough to bury them." I studied the images, my pulse steady cold. "We don't just need to bury them, Mike. We need to time it right. If we strike too early, they'll wriggle out. We wait until their plan is fully exposed, then we cut them off at the knees." Mike's grin was sharp. "Now you're talking like a man who knows war." That evening, Rebecca called. Her voice was bright but tinged with unease. "Dad, Mom seems different lately. Distant. Is everything okay between you two?" The question stabbed me. My daughter caught in the middle of a war she didn't even know existed. I steadied my voice. "Just the usual stresses, sweetheart. Nothing you need to worry about. But she pressed on. It's just Dan's been asking strange questions about your company. Stuff about partnerships contracts. I thought it was for a case, but now I'm not sure. Her words confirmed what I already knew. Daniel was probing her too, using her innocence as cover. Don't worry, Rebecca, I said gently. Your old man can handle himself. We hung up, but guilt lingered. Protecting her meant lying for now. Late that night, I sat in my office surrounded by blueprints and contracts, the smell of old paper grounding me. I replayed Mike's recording again, Elaine's voice like a knife twisting in my chest. Harold really thinks I love him. I closed my eyes, grief sharp but fleeting. Rage remained steady and useful. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man preparing for battle. And this battle wasn't about heartbreak, it was about survival. I whispered to the empty room words no one else could hear. You wanted a war, Elaine, you've got one. The evidence piled up faster than I imagined. Within a week, Mike had built a small mountain of proof photos, recordings, bank statements, even copies of emails Daniel thought were safely tucked behind law office firewalls. It was all there spread across my desk, like the blueprints of a crumbling building. I stared at one email in particular, printed in stark black and white. From Daniel Parker to Margaret Mitchell. Subject timeline. Once Harold signs the quarterly filings, we'll move forward. File in June, argue irreconcilable differences. With Iowa statutes, you'll be entitled to half-plus support. The key is painting him as controlling. Start documenting every decision he makes without your input: groceries, bills, business expenses. Frame it as intimidation. We'll have the judge convinced in weeks. I ran my thumb across the page, feeling the words burn into my skin. Elaine Margaret, as he called her in his cold legalese, wasn't just complicit. She was the centerpiece. The woman who had whispered, "I do," beneath that oak tree 30 years ago, was now rehearsing how to play the role of victim. Mike leaned back in the chair across from me, arms crossed. You've got enough here to ruin them both. If you want to go to the cops, I can package this. But I shook my head. Not yet. They're preparing for war in family court. If I go too soon, they'll twist it. I want them confident, cocky. I want them walking into court thinking they've already won, and then I snapped my fingers. The floor disappears. Mike grinned. You've got ice in your veins, Harold. I like it. That night, Elaine came home late. She smelled faintly of champagne, her lipstick just smudged enough to betray she hadn't been with her church committee like she claimed. She slipped off her heels and smiled at me like nothing in the world was amiss. Sorry, dear. Meeting ran long, she said, tossing her coat onto the chair. I studied her, hiding the bile rising in my throat. Meeting ran long. That phrase had probably bought her years of freedom. How many times had I believed it? Everything all right, I asked, my voice even. Of course, why wouldn't it be? I smiled faintly, just checking. The calmness in my tone seemed to reassure her. She never noticed that my eyes no longer carried love, only calculation. 2 days later, I received another call from Martha, my accountant. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Harold, I found something worse. Elaine opened a separate account 3 months ago. Transfers have been going in regularly. I traced it to a joint account with Daniel Parker. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. She's funding him. More than that. The balance is over $47,000, all siphoned from your accounts. If a judge sees this as marital money funneled to a son-in-law, it could get messy. Messy, that was one word for it. Treachery was another. Lock it down, I told her, quietly. I'll handle the rest. That evening I parked outside Rebecca's house again, hidden in the shadows across the street. I told myself it was to see if Elaine and Daniel would slip, but truthfully, I wanted confirmation with my own eyes. Sure enough, Daniel's silver Lexus gleamed in the driveway, and an hour later, Elaine's laugh floated faintly through the open window. This time, though, Mike was in place. His small directional microphone captured every poisoned word. I sat in my truck as he relayed the feed through a receiver. Daniel's voice. He's clueless. By September, you'll have the house, the cars, half the business. You'll never want for anything again." Elaine's laugh, soft and practiced, after 25 years of pretending I deserve it. The old fool really believes I love him. I dug my nails into my palms until they drew blood. Pretending. That single word nearly unraveled me. Mike cut in his voice low. "You're hearing this live, Harold. You sure you don't want me to march in there with a camera?" "No," I whispered. "Not yet. Let them think they're safe." That weekend, Rebecca called again. Her tone was worried now. "Dad, something's strange." "Mom came over and she was asking me about your business contracts, who manages accounts, that kind of thing. She kept pressing like she was fishing for information. And Dan, he's been acting off." Secretive. I swallowed hard. Rebecca listened to me carefully. "If your mother or Dan ask you anything about my business, you tell them you don't know. You understand?" There was a pause. "Dad, what's going on?" My chest ached hearing the concern in her voice. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just do this for me. Please." Another pause, then softly, "I trust you, Dad. Always." Her words cut deep. I hated lying to her, but if she knew now, it would only drag her into their web. By Monday, Mike had more. Photos of Elaine and Daniel entering a downtown law office late at night. Copies of motions Daniel had drafted ready to file petition for dissolution of marriage. I read the draft slowly, bile rising. Grounds irreconcilable differences, evidence controlling financial behaviors, intimidation, emotional neglect. Control, intimidation, neglect. They were turning 30 years of sacrifice into ammunition. Mike muttered, "They're preparing to paint you as a monster." I nodded, lips pressed thin. "Then let them. By the time they stand in front of a judge, we'll have enough evidence to bury the both of them." I tapped the manila folder filled with recordings and photos. This isn't just defense, Mike. This is prosecution. That night, I sat alone in the den, the clock ticking loudly in the silence. Elaine was upstairs humming as she folded laundry. The image of her so domestic, so ordinary, clashed with the venom I'd heard on the tapes. I thought of every Christmas we'd shared, every anniversary dinner, every whispered goodnight. Had all of it been staged, a performance to keep me building the empire she intended to steal? I stared at the wedding photo on the mantel, Elaine in ivory silk, me awkward in a rented tux. Her smile then had seemed genuine. Now it looked like a mask. My hands shook as I picked up my phone. With a steady breath, I pressed record. "This is Harold Mitchell," I said softly. "If you're hearing this, then you'll know the truth. My wife Elaine and my son-in-law Daniel Parker are conspiring to destroy everything I've built. But I won't let them. Not without a fight." I ended the recording and sat back, breathing hard. The war had begun in earnest. By Tuesday morning, my grief had hardened into something sharper. Betrayal could break a man, but in me it sparked a cold determination. Elaine and Daniel thought they were 2 steps ahead. They hadn't counted on the years I'd spent learning to anticipate storms before they arrived. Running a construction business wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about strategy, survival, and knowing when to strike. I began with the banks. Tom Bradley, president of First National and a golf partner of mine for 20 years, raised his eyebrows when I walked into his office. The mahogany-paneled room smelled faintly of cigars and leather polish, familiar ground where I'd negotiated dozens of construction loans. "Harold," he said warmly, rising to shake my hand. "What brings you here so early? Planning another big project?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that. I need an account security review." He studied me carefully. "Everything all right?" "Just making sure the foundations are solid," I said, my tone even. "I want all joint access points temporarily frozen. Credit lines, automatic payments, everything. Require in-person verification and photo ID for future access." Tom's brows furrowed. "That'll inconvenience Elaine quite a bit." "I'm counting on it." For a moment, silence hung between us, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Then Tom nodded slowly. Understood. You've always been a cautious man. I'll have my team initiate the holds by noon. Relief mixed with grim satisfaction. By lunchtime, Elaine would feel the first tremors of her collapsing empire. Sure enough, at 12:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with her call. "Harold," she snapped, her voice high and shrill. "Something's wrong with our accounts. My card was declined at lunch. I called the bank, and they said there's a security hold. Do you know anything about this?" I forced my voice into feigned confusion. "Security hold? That sounds serious. Did they say what triggered it?" "They said identity verification. But this is ridiculous. I was humiliated in front of Linda and Susan. I couldn't even pay for my meal." Her distress was genuine, but not because our finances were under threat. No, because her social standing had been dented. "I'll call Tom and see what I can do," I assured her, hiding the satisfaction bubbling beneath my calm. We hung up, and I leaned back in my chair, the first true smile in weeks spreading across my face. For 25 years, Elaine had taken my provision for granted. Now she was learning what it felt like when the faucet shut off. But freezing accounts was only the first step. Mike's updates arrived in steady streams. That afternoon, he reported that Daniel had tried to withdraw funds from the joint account 3 separate times. Each attempt was declined. At 4:15, he attempted to move money from a trust account, one meant for Rebecca's future. That, too, was frozen. Mike chuckled over the phone. "Your son-in-law's throwing a tantrum in the bank lobby, threatening legal action. The tellers look like they want to throw him out." "Good," I said flatly. "Let him feel powerless." Every frozen account was another nail in their coffin. By Wednesday, Elaine's texts were relentless. 1:02 p.m. "Harold, this is insane. How am I supposed to buy groceries? 3:15 p.m. Even our emergency line is locked. What's happening, Setsa? 27 p.m. Please call me. We need to talk." Each message dripped with panic, and I let them sit unanswered. Meanwhile, I began my counterattack in earnest. The first calls went to my subcontractor network. Men who'd sweated beside me for decades. Men who knew the value of a handshake. I asked questions about Daniel Parker, his reputation, his dealings. The stories poured out like floodwater. "Sharp lawyer," one said, "but he's got champagne tastes on a beer budget. Owes me 10 grand from last year." Another, "He's been stringing subcontractors along, promises payment next week, then disappears." And another, "I wouldn't trust him with a nickel. Guy's drowning in debt." Every detail painted the picture of a man already teetering on the edge. By Thursday, I had gathered enough evidence to make Daniel squirm. Mike confirmed the State Bar Association already had complaints stacking against him: client trust account violations, mismanaged funds. I called the complaint hotline myself, careful, deliberate. "Yes, I'd like to file a formal grievance about attorney misconduct. Daniel Parker has engaged in a pattern of trust account abuse and misrepresentation." I provided names, dates, amounts owed. By the time I hung up, Daniel's fragile professional reputation was no longer merely tarnished, it was in flames. That evening, I finally looked Rebecca in the eyes. She stopped by the house after work, sensing the storm. "Dad," she said softly, "what's happening?" "Mom's frantic. Dan's on edge. I feel like something's being hidden from me." I hesitated. For days, I'd kept her in the dark, protecting her. But she was no child anymore. She was a grown woman, strong, perceptive. "Rebecca," I began, my voice thick, "there are things you don't know. Things about your mother and Dan." Her eyes searched mine wide with dread. "Tell me." I swallowed hard. "They're planning to take everything from me. From us. Your mother and your husband. Together." Her face went pale. "No, that's impossible." I pulled out the recorder, pressed play. Elaine's voice filled the room, mocking, cruel. "Harold really thinks I love him." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. "My God, it's true." I reached for her hand, steady. "I didn't want you to know. But now you do." and I need you to be strong." She nodded slowly, pain and fury mixing in her expression. "What do you want me to do?" "For now," I said, squeezing her hand, "nothing. Just act normal. Let them think they've still fooled us. When the time comes, I'll need your testimony." "But not yet." She drew a shaky breath. "You have it." Her voice was firm despite the tremor. That night after she left, I sat alone in the darkened living room. The silence was heavy, but for the first time I didn't feel powerless. Elaine and Daniel thought they were cornering me. What they didn't realize was that I had already turned the tables. The counterattack had begun. The courthouse smelled of dust and varnish, the kind of smell that never left buildings older than their tenants. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the flecks of dust that drifted lazily above the oak benches. I had walked through these halls 100 times before pulling permits, signing contracts, attending zoning meetings. But never like this. Never as a man on trial for his own life. Elaine sat 3 rows ahead, perfectly composed. She wore a navy suit pearls around her neck and a mask of calm dignity. To anyone else, she looked like the picture of a wronged wife, Grace under pressure. Beside her sat Daniel, jaw set, papers stacked neatly in front of him. My daughter's husband, my betrayer. Rebecca was absent from their side. I caught sight of her across the aisle, seated near me. Her arms were folded, her chin high. Her eyes met mine briefly, and I saw in them not pity, but strength. It gave me courage. The bailiff called us to order. Judge Henry Walsh presided, an old friend, though today he wore no friendship on his face, only authority. Docket number 23-0416, the clerk read. Elaine Margaret Mitchell versus Harold James Mitchell. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words echoed like a death sentence. Daniel rose smoothly, his voice calm, rehearsed. Your Honor, my client comes before you today seeking relief from a marriage marked by control, intimidation, and financial manipulation. For years, Mr. Mitchell has exercised dominance over all household and business finances, leaving my client with no autonomy, no voice. Elaine lowered her eyes, the picture of quiet suffering. My blood boiled, but I kept still. Daniel continued. We will present evidence showing a pattern of coercion, emotional neglect, and financial abuse. My client seeks her fair share of the marital estate, as is her legal right. Judge Walsh nodded. Proceed. Elaine testified first. Her voice was soft, steady, each word landing like a carefully placed stone. Harold decided everything. What car I drove, what house we bought, even what I wore to social events. He'd criticize my spending, belittle my choices. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. The lies rolled off her tongue like scripture. My hands clenched beneath the table. Then came exhibits, receipts for purchases. I'd questioned notes she'd scribbled, claiming I'd refused to let her buy certain things. All carefully framed as evidence of abuse. When Daniel sat down, satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. It was my turn. My attorney, James O'Connor, a wiry man with sharp eyes, rose. Your Honor, what opposing counsel has presented is a performance. My client has indeed managed finances because he built and sustained every asset in question. But what Mrs. Mitchell neglected to share is her own deception. We have recordings, emails, and photographs that reveal not a victim but a conspirator. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Elaine's composure cracked just slightly. James pressed play on the first recording. Daniel's voice filled the chamber. By September, you'll have the house, the cars, half the business. He won't see it coming. Gasps echoed. Then Elaine's voice, sharp and unmistakable. After 25 years of pretending I deserve it, the old fool really believes I love him. The words rang against the wood-paneled walls like a gavel strike. Elaine's face drained of color. Judge Walsh's eyes narrowed. Mr. O'Connor, what exactly are we hearing? Your Honor, James said smoothly, These are authenticated recordings collected over several weeks by a licensed investigator. They demonstrate a premeditated scheme by Mrs. Mitchell and Mr. Daniel Parker to defraud Mr. Mitchell of his assets through fabricated abuse claims. I have affidavits, photographs, and financial records to corroborate." He gestured to the exhibits stacked high beside him. Daniel shot to his feet. "Objection. These are illegally obtained." On the contrary, James replied calmly, "They were collected in public settings in compliance with Iowa law." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled. The court will review." Elaine's mask crumbled. She twisted in her seat toward Daniel, her lips moving in silent fury. One by one, James laid out the case. Bank records showing $47,000 siphoned into a secret joint account. Photographs of Elaine handing Daniel confidential company documents. Emails between them discussing how to paint Harold as controlling. The jury of peers wasn't needed. This was family court. But the courtroom audience shifted with each revelation, whispers filling the air. When Rebecca was called to testify, the weight of the moment pressed on us all. She rose slowly, her nurse's scrubs still faintly smelling of antiseptic. She glanced at Elaine, then at Daniel, then fixed her eyes on me. "My father is not controlling. He's not abusive. He's sacrificed everything for this family. And I know because I overheard conversations between my husband and my mother that made my blood run cold. They planned this. Together." Her voice shook, but her words landed like hammers. Elaine's head dropped into her hands. Daniel muttered something under his breath, his jaw tight. By late afternoon, the tide had fully turned. Judge Walsh leaned forward, his voice grave. "This court has heard enough to raise serious concerns not only about the validity of Mrs. Mitchell's petition, but about potential fraud and conspiracy. I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor's office for investigation." The gavel struck. "Until then, all assets remain frozen. Mr. Mitchell retains control of his business. Court adjourned." The room erupted in whispers. Elaine slumped in her chair, pale and shaking. Daniel's face burned red sweat beading at his temple. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, but my spine straight. For the first time in weeks, I felt tall. As I walked past them, Elaine's eyes darted to mine, pleading silently. For mercy. For understanding, I gave her nothing. Only silence. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled fresher than it had in months. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, cameras flashing. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have a comment on the recordings? Were you aware of your wife's relationship with Daniel Parker? Will you pursue criminal charges?" I paused only once, looking directly into a camera lens. "The truth always comes out," I said simply. Then I walked away. Rebecca caught up to me, slipping her arm through mine. "You did it, Dad." "No," I corrected gently. "We did." For the first time in a long while, hope flickered. But the war wasn't over. The court battle was just one front. Now came the fallout, the consequences neither Elaine nor Daniel could escape. And I would be there to see it. In the weeks that followed the courtroom battle, life took on a strange rhythm, quiet, almost hollow, as though the storm had passed, but the debris still littered the ground. Elaine moved out within days, her belongings packed hastily into boxes that Daniel himself came to collect. I stood at the window, arms crossed, watching them load the trunk of her Buick Enclave. She didn't look up once. Not at me, not at the house we had shared for nearly 3 decades. Perhaps shame kept her gaze down, or maybe she'd already moved on in her mind, convinced Daniel would shield her from the fallout. But Daniel had his own storm brewing. News traveled fast in small towns. Within a week, whispers about the courtroom recordings spread like wildfire. Clients dropped him. The Bar Association launched a formal investigation. Then came the headlines. Attorney under review for fraudulent practices. Local lawyer faces disbarment after conspiracy allegations. The law firm he once bragged about cut him loose overnight. He was left scrambling, reputation shredded, creditors circling like vultures. Rebecca filed for divorce soon after. I sat beside her at the kitchen table as she signed the papers, her hand trembling, but her chin high. "I can't believe I shared my life with him," she whispered. "You believed in him," I said gently. "That's no weakness, Rebecca. That's love. He betrayed it, that's on him, not you." She nodded, tears falling silently onto the signature line. Elaine tried reaching out once. She called late at night, her voice thin, uncertain. "Harold, I don't know what I was thinking. I made mistakes. We can fix this, can't we?" I listened quietly, staring at the wedding photograph I had taken down from the mantel, but hadn't yet thrown away. "Elaine," I said evenly, "you weren't thinking. You were planning. For months. For years, maybe. And no, this can't be fixed." There was silence on the line, broken only by her shaky breath. "I never wanted to hurt you." The words were hollow, rehearsed. I ended the call without reply. It was the last time I heard her voice. Life didn't return to what it had been. How could it? But it began to find a new rhythm. Rebecca moved back into the house for a time, her laughter filling the halls again. We rebuilt in small ways. Sunday breakfasts, long walks after dinner, evenings on the porch swing, talking about her future. "Maybe I'll go back to school," she mused one night, her eyes on the horizon. "Specialize in pediatrics. Start fresh." I smiled, proud. "You've got the strength for it. More than you know." And in her resilience, I found my own. The town once full of whispers began to show quiet respect. Men I'd worked beside for years clapped me on the back, saying, "You handled it with dignity, Harold." Women stopped me in the grocery store, voices low but kind. "You didn't deserve what they did." Dignity. A strange word for a man who'd been gutted in his own home. But maybe dignity wasn't about never being hurt. It was about how you carried yourself after. One crisp autumn morning, I drove out to the edge of town where an office building stood half-finished. It was one of my last projects before everything collapsed. I walked through the skeletal frame steel beams, reaching toward the sky. Dust swirled around my boots, the air rich with the smell of cut lumber. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined the workers hammering, the buzz of saws, the laughter during lunch breaks. This was what I had built. This was my legacy, not accounts, not possessions, but honest labor that would outlast me. And no betrayal could erase that. In the quiet of the evenings, I often found myself on the porch, a glass of bourbon in hand, watching the sun set over the fields. The loneliness still came sharp and sudden. Memories of Elaine's laughter, her hand in mine, the warmth we once shared. But then the other memories would surface, her voice on those recordings, her betrayal, the venom in her words. Grief and anger, loss and resolve. They lived side by side in me now. But above all, there was peace, because the truth had come out. And though it cost me dearly, I was still standing. Rebecca joined me one evening, sitting quietly beside me on the porch swing. She looked out at the same horizon I'd stared at for weeks. "You know," she said softly, "you always told me buildings need strong foundations. People do too." I chuckled, the sound rough but genuine. Guess we both learned that lesson the hard way. She smiled faintly, leaning her head against my shoulder. "We'll be okay, Dad." "Yes," I said, staring at the fading light. "We will. Now, as I tell you this story, I don't do it for pity. I do it because betrayal leaves scars, but scars tell a story of survival. Maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe by a friend, a partner, a family member. The wound feels fresh, the trust shattered. I want you to know you can survive it. You can come through stronger, even if the world you knew turns upside down. Hold on to your foundation. Hold on to what's true. And don't ever let betrayal define you. If my story has meant something to you, I invite you to share your thoughts. Tell me your own story of resilience. And if you'd like to hear more, subscribe so we can walk through these storms together. Because no matter how dark the night, morning always comes.